Thank you, my friend.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for sticking around. I think we have a terrific panel to wind up the day's activities. Where are they? Where is my panel? Oh, right here. Okay. We have Adam Rothstein, who is the general partner of Disruptive Technologies. He's a please come up as I introduce you to the applause of everybody, right? Adam has a $50 million venture capital fund, a $200 million late-stage fund, and over dinner I learned that he's working on a mezzanine fund to help support some of the companies that come out of his VC fund that need later-stage financing. Natti Ginor is the managing director at Jefferies. He's probably the leading investment banker in the United States on Israel capital markets. At dinner last night, I learned that 10% of his profits, 75% of his time, and 100% of his hair loss comes from his Israeli activities. And where is Elen? Elen Katz is the founder and CEO of Real Vision Limited. He is an entrepreneur, has many patents, has a very interesting story because his company is involved in the railway industry, train industry around the world, even though Israel doesn't have much of a train system itself. Part of the testament to Israeli entrepreneurs and innovation looking at problems that need to be solved around the world and finding innovative solutions. We have a fourth panel member who is busy accompanying the minister around town, Inon Elroy, who will join us later. He's the Israeli economic minister to North America as part of the Ministry of Economy and Industry. So I'd like to start with Adam to talk to us a little bit about the venture capital ecosystem, the changing nature of innovation and technology in Israel, and some of his experiences and challenges that he's faced as a VC operating in Israel.
Thank you. So in the last 10 years, one of the most interesting things that we've seen is I think everyone's taking it at this point as a given that the level of innovation in Israel is just unparalleled. But what's been so interesting to us is real value creation is at some levels a combination of innovation and execution. And what you're seeing in the last 10 years is real development on the execution side for these Israeli companies. So 10 years ago, the exits for these companies were all related more or less to the level of innovation. The larger the market, the more innovative the product, the larger you saw in terms of the exits. You had a long list of reasons why Israel was so good on the innovation side, and sadly, you had a long list of reasons why on the execution side it was more challenging. And what you've really seen in the last 10 years is incredible improvement on the execution side. And while people talk about Waze and Mobileye, which are really fantastic exits from Israeli companies in terms of really large numbers, if you look at it, those were really exits in terms of they were very innovative companies. Where I would like to point people to is look at companies like Wix or Playtika, where the level of innovation was interesting and good and solid, but they really out-executed their competition. And I would push back a little in terms of it's all about exits to a certain extent, whether you do it through M&A or you do it through public markets. But this idea that Israeli companies trade at a discount, I'd push back a little bit. The world is so enamored with Israeli innovation and with the technology coming out of Israel that they're paying a premium for Israeli development. So if I have a company right now that I think is going to be worth $1 billion in 5 years, but you'll pay me $500 million right now, you may not see that billion-dollar public exit. And so when people are talking about discounts, they're really looking at the public market, and they're missing the premiums that people are paying in the private market for those development teams. If you look at, again, to take Playtika again for a minute, here is a company, if people aren't familiar with it, social casinos. They made slot machines that people played for fun. It's very hard from an innovation standpoint on the front face of it to build that much of a better slot machine. But they ran the company and executed the company so much better than the competition that the company that originally sold to Caesars for $220 million, but was kept really as an Israeli entity, then sold 4 or 5 years later for $4.4 billion, receiving the highest multiple of any company in the space. They just out-executed the competition. So this notion that somehow there is some reason that Israeli companies trade at a discount, the opportunity in Israel from a venture capital perspective is really, other than the difficulty in finding great companies, is really once you've found great companies, there's a premium put on this level of innovation, and if you can execute as well as innovate, the market really is fantastic for these companies.
Great. Elen, would you like to take us through some of your history and experience with, I understand that you patented this invention in 2004. The company was only started in 2015, and when you went to VCs and said that you had a hardware device, nobody was really very interested.
Yeah, Rail Vision is operating in a market that I'm sure nobody knows it's existing. It's called the rail industry. It's huge. And no technologies over there, no patent, no nothing. And basically, the rail industry was stuck still in the 18th century and was chasing the automotive industry. And they started to talk about autonomous train only because the automotive industry talked about it. And I discovered the opportunity just without any connection. I have no connection to train industry. Today, we consider everyone talk about Mobileye. We consider to be the Mobileye of the train industry. We are the only one in the world who is doing obstacle detection for train. And when I started, I was kicked out of all the venture capitals in Israel. In Israel, if it's not pixel, software, mobile, or cyber, they don't want to talk with you. So I was 2 years, I had no money, nobody was willing to talk with us. And we had to raise funds through private investors. It was a quite hard experience. And I must admit that even that the automotive industry was so much successful, it helped us because the word automotive or autonomous with the word Israel came so strong together that today is quite easy for us. But we are still struggling because I'm sure that most of the people don't know that the train industry is a huge industry. 1 billion people a day are traveling with train. And we're still struggling to explain what we are doing. But then we say we are Mobileye of train, and then it's more simple. The thing about Israel, the way I see it, that we can invent anything because we are very curious. We Israeli look at, see whatever is wrong around the world all the time. That's why we have hard life, especially in the neighborhood we are living. But in the other hand, it's make us looking at things in a different way. And I'm a lot in Europe. Europe is the heart of the train industry. And they keep asking one question: what the hell you Israeli have to do with train? And we don't have an answer for that. We don't have train industry in Israel. But I feel that in the end, whatever we are doing right now in the world, we are relying on this world that's called the startup nation. And today, my life is a bit more easy. I came the first time in my life to do whatever we are doing here in New York and expose the company. And basically, we are running on the success of the automotive industry, which is fine with me. But we had a very hard start.
I would just say that Elen, as usual, is being humble. We spent about we had scheduled 45 minutes a few weeks ago in Israel, and I think he had to kick me out after 2.5 hours because of what they're accomplishing. So I think that the company's achieved a lot more than he would let on to. And I guess in the interest of full disclosure, I should mention that we spend a lot of time with VCs in Israel, but I'm only invested in one, and that's Disruptive. Just full disclosure on that front. That's usually a bad sign, by the way, but not in this instance. But as for any specific question that you wanted me to...
Yeah, I wanted you to talk more about your background and how you got involved in Israeli capital markets.
I was born in Israel and have dual citizenship and speak the language, but really evolved career-wise in the U.S. After law school, where I met my Israeli wife. I focused on institutional equity sales and covering a lot of the largest hedge funds in New York and Connecticut. And over time, I got drawn to the Israeli ecosystem first on the equity side. While it's relatively small at 450 billion of AUM, it's a very, very interesting market. It's in the hands of 10 institutions, effectively. It grows, the assets under management grow every month because of the forced savings and the pensions and so on. I learned that most of the big insurance companies and pension funds have basically two major portfolios, a kind of global portfolio and an Israel dedicated portfolio. And the Israel dedicated portfolios are really interesting because they grow every month, they have a ton of capital, and you can't own that many shares of Teva and Checkpoint. And so what ended up happening was that they were looking for ways to deploy capital in ways that were effective. This is at a time when a lot of the companies on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and Itai Ben-Zev, the CEO of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, is here, but back then a lot of those companies were a lot smaller. Now, you've got companies of $6 and $7 and $8 and $900 million and $1 billion trading on the exchange, but at that time there wasn't a lot of money to deploy into Israeli-specific companies. And so a lot of the Israeli institutions, first of all, had to look for ways to invest outside of Israel. And they all spoke English. They were sophisticated investors. They wanted good research. They could understand it. And they were undercovered. They were not focused on. I was there at first a few times a year on family vacations, and then ultimately went there on business trips. And ultimately, I can't spend enough time there. Much to the chagrin of my wife and kids. Every opportunity I get, I head there. When we started to realize that the innovation was as great as it is, and that the companies were creating amazing products but needed guidance and advice and advocacy and just genuine care, but then also Jefferies was unique in that they enabled us to approach it in a very long-term, methodical way. My management did some pretty smart things as I started to build the business. They said, look, I think it's a bad idea for you to go and build an office and have someone be there, because then you have sunken costs in the beginning of every year, and that forces you to do things that you might not otherwise do. You won't be as objective. You won't pitch just for the things you're uniquely qualified for or where you can really help. You'll just try to chase fees. And we wanted to not have that reputation. So I found myself in the position of working with great partners like Crystal, who you heard from before. We work very closely with the team at Blue Star to help kind of raise awareness of what's happening in that market. Had a 2-hour meeting yesterday with Itai and heard amazing things about what's happening at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and what they've done to make it a much more easy process. They've had, I think, a record year of 15 plus IPOs this year, with another 5 or 6 coming. Big companies, $300-400 million companies, real companies, and where we can be helpful down the road to those companies as they may want to expand their shareholder base, diversify their shareholder base, add global investors, and maybe do a list. And so it's just been interesting to watch all of the business evolve for Jefferies, securities lending, and just a lot of the things that market needed. And so it's been really fun.
Adam, it's the investors in a VC fund and the investors in late-stage financing are usually quite different, and so are the funds and the principals. How did you get involved in both the VC stage and the late stage?
So it's actually interesting. It's the same families.
Oh, it's
in
same.
both funds for us, and it's it's people wanting exposure to Israel and wanting those different return buckets. I mean, people in a diversified portfolio are coming up with an allocation of assets, and not dissimilar there. The advantages in Israel in the last stage funding and the early stage funding are somewhat similar, right? To a certain extent, there's a certain amount of arbitrage that comes at different stages in the development process. Israel has a much lower cost of labor and a lower turnover rate in that labor. So developing a tech company in Israel comes at an initial lower valuation and also lower labor costs. And so at some point when you globalize these companies, you get a jump up in valuation. And so from the early stage, investors wanted that level of exposure. And then what they found was there's a certain amount of a relationship network that gets built. And so on the later stage companies, it was basically those companies who we had tracked from the very early stage. And so they wanted to, as early stage investors with a 10-year time horizon, they wanted to take advantage of more near-term returns and started investing in some of the late stage as well.
And now you're working on a mezzanine fund.
Well, so things actually, successful companies are, to the point of previous panelists, are actually staying private even later. So when you budget for your really successful companies, they're staying private even longer than we expected. And so in those most successful companies, your pro rata rights are very, very valuable. And so it seemed a waste to give up those pro rata rights in those oversubscribed companies. And the idea was to give investors more exposure to those companies that were already defined as winners in the earlier portfolio.
And actually, I'll just comment on one thing that Adam said. We talked about companies staying private longer. It's an interesting thing to think about. A lot of people viewed Waze as this kind of remarkable win for Israel or for the VC community. But I think everybody agrees that a year later it would have been worth $2.5 billion, and 3 years later it would have been worth $7 billion. And obviously VCs have a mandate and a plan to recycle capital every so often rather. But I think what some did, and I think you probably did with some of your portfolio companies that we know fairly well, is realize that why force the recycling of capital and attempt to kind of catch lightning in a bottle again, where you should really let your winners run. And I think Israel now today has more companies worth over $1 billion in the private market, well, I was going to say than ever, but I don't know that they ever did before this year.
And that's one of the really interesting things about the space when we were talking about execution before, and it's a really good point that Natti brought up. To the extent to maximize value of the innovation, at some point you need execution and distribution. And so historically what you had seen is those companies best able to monetize the innovation could pay the best price for that innovation. And now what you're seeing in Israel is you're seeing a level of execution that allows them to grow companies farther and farther along, so that premium that other companies are willing to pay is not so great compared to what they think they can make on their own. And that level of talent, as more and more global companies come into Israel and more Israeli executives go to global companies, and you find that you're getting more and more talent back to Israel and Israeli companies that know how to do consultative selling and marketing and all the things that you need to really get distribution of great innovation.
I mean, we've seen Israeli companies say no to $1 billion plus offers in the last 6 months. I mean, we've never seen that before. Like, no thanks, we think we can grow it bigger than that. And that's a really cool thing to see.
There's a greater appreciation for the Israeli ecosystem than there ever was before. It's funny, what you used to see maybe 7-8 years ago is companies, multinationals would buy these Israeli companies for the technology, and they'd make the team move to Silicon Valley or to wherever their corporates were for the most part. Now what you're seeing, and it's interesting, is people want to pay a premium for that beachhead in Israel because they know that beachhead and that R&D development is going to make it easier to hire more and more great engineers and more great developers.
Mobilize building a tower in Israel.
So you've seen a real change and an appreciation for that ecosystem that Israel has really developed in the last 10 years.
Yep.
Ellen, having bootstrapped your company with private sources, how do you now that you have a product that's that people are interested in around the world, how do you look at your financing options for going forward?
The first stage that we went through was to prove the technology. So it was dealing with cameras and hardware and so on. And of course, we are dealing with software and deep learning. And once we convinced the industry and the big operators and players like Siemens, Bosch, Thales, Deutsche Bahn, Swiss Rail, Trenitalia, and we start to get the feedback, and we understood that we have something in hand. Then we went to the second part of the plan, which is big data. Since we are living in the train industry, tracks are going in a very unique areas in the world. Nobody is moving where trains are moving. So suddenly we got attention from Google Map, where they would just want to map all the world. So it's not all about Street View. It's about filming the whole world. So they approach us and say, where you are traveling, where the tracks are, nobody can go there. So suddenly we got attention from Google. And we are doing digital map for the autonomous train in the future. And it turned out to be that we want to do a jump between the train industry and the big world. And this jump was about the word big data. When you go into big data, we are filming the world with high quality cameras and we have to store it. And I heard the sentence 1 month ago from Google Israel and said that Rail Vision might be one day one of the biggest data suppliers, video suppliers for Google because you're all the time filming the world all over the places and in places that we cannot reach. And the point that we went out of the train industry, like for example, on the same system that we have on each locomotive, we have a small device. This device is collecting weather data, humidity, air pressure, and temperature. Those are the three cornerstones of making a synopsis map, weather maps. And suddenly we got customers that say, look, in a normal country, you got those stations that collect weather, and let's say you can reach to 20, 30,000 measurements a day. But when those locomotives go all over the place, and every half a mile they collect weather sample, suddenly you got 2 million points of measuring a day. And the data that we are now creating is so big that only 1 month ago we opened a big data department. And it turned out to be all the financial plan regarding how much money we need for whatever we are doing is nothing compares to the amount we have to deal now with storage, clouds, and of course we've been suddenly approached by the giants like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, because everyone understands we are filming video and all the time from thousands of locomotives all over the world. So everyone started to put attention to this small startup company that on the way of having obstacle detection for train, we are a huge data producer. And it's a huge jump to go from whatever we did before to wherever we are going now. And this is the big difference between us and Mobileye. Our technology is completely different because trains are controlled by control center. In the autonomous vehicle world, there is the driver, there is the event, and it's coming back to the driver. With us, there is the driver, there is the event, and on the way back, the information stops and go to the driver and go outside. So suddenly we have to deal with transmitting data, film, and so on. And then we got Deutsche Telekom came to us and said, this is a big project. We will do the transmitting of the data. So we suddenly found ourselves playing with huge players like NVIDIA, Google, and Sony's inside this project, and they got nothing to do with the train industry. So we find ourselves in a huge jump between doing obstacle detection and handling the data because of the uniqueness of the environment where trains are going around the world.
And when you think about financing sources going forward, you have a strategic investor, Foresight, that has a big piece. Do you think about the Israeli capital markets or the U.S. capital markets or a series, a VC round? What do you find most attractive?
First of all, only because of the subject of big data, we find out that we need more money than we anticipated in the beginning. And then Israel cannot provide it. I personally was quite disappointed with Israel because nobody really in Israel for years understood what we are doing. And I'm sure that the way we are going now, and since some American company involved in whatever we are doing, look, everyone said it before, that the size matter. in this case. And Israel is a nice place to raise fund, but when you reach to a level that you might be the next 1/3 or 1/10 of Mobileye, Israel cannot provide us whatever we need. They think completely on a very short term. They want to see their investment immediately coming back in months, year. They don't give you much time to live. And Natti said that yes, Waze might be getting bigger and bigger in 1 year, but I think Israeli don't have, first of all, the self-confidence to be out there in the market and deal with the world, because we are Israeli. It's a small country. Every day might be a war starting. So you cannot know what's going on. We are living in a crazy neighborhood. So when an opportunity is coming to us, we take it. And definitely the way we are heading right now, we have to go outside of Israel and look for money in other places like here or Europe.
Natti, how would you advise Real Vision to proceed?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, Foresight in its own right is a very interesting company with great potential, and Real Vision is at a different kind of point in what it needs. And ideally, you know, it would be nice if they could operate independently and do what they both need to do separately. I think that having spent a lot of time with Israeli investors and with U.S. investors that look at Israeli technologies, my view is that a lot of times the best bet for companies like that is to list. Yeah, of course.
Elen.
Is to potentially list in both to raise capital from Israeli investors on the TASE, U.S. investors on the NASDAQ. I think a lot of times U.S. investors we've seen ask when we're doing an Israeli IPO in the U.S., are the Israelis participating? Right? They want to know if those people in the neighborhood down the block that you served in the military with or carpool your kids with are buying into that and trust in the management team and respect the company. We learned over doing several, in particularly in healthcare IPOs, where we start the first 2 days of the roadshow in Israel and get demand from there locally. And then when we start in the US, people say, you know, oh, the deal's already 30% subscribed from Israeli institutional investors. That changes the tenor of the dialogue a great deal. So it really is company specific, case specific, and timing specific. I think there was a period of time where the TASE was, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange was less attractive, though I think a lot of positive things are happening there. We're talking to one company right now that's too small to go public in the US. It's maybe $100 million valuation, probably wants to raise $50 million, which is a lot as a percentage of its market cap. And you know, they were asking about the AIM in London and about some other, but you know, it really made a lot of sense for them to consider the TASE first. And we love the company, we'd love to help them, but we think ideally a year from now, 2 years from now, we can help them do a listing in the US, et cetera. So we're starting, I think, to all learn about the timeline and the best strategy for each specific company based on a number of different factors, what investors in Israel are looking for, the US are looking for, growth rates, multiples. And the better we get at understanding all of that, the better advice we can give different companies.
I want to add to it because in the beginning we were looking for, let's say, pure money. But then we find out that behind us there is a huge industry. And the industry itself, players like Siemens and Bosch and Thales, they have quite a lot of General Electric. Today we believe that the real combination for a technological company like us is to take money from investors and strategic partners.
Yeah.
Neither of them can live alone with us. We need both of them. And only recently we realized that that's the best combination for us. And now we are operating on this direction, getting money from pure investment and then getting involved with the big players in the market.
And it's better for the companies too, because a lot of times they need a certain amount of money and they don't want to sell 30% of the company at a discounted valuation right out of the gate. So if they can take some money from some strategics, which will kind of help ensure that their valuation achieves what it can because of the incentive that that strategic has to help you grow, then we can have 10 or 20% go public on the US or on the TASE or a combination and help the company kind of grow its market cap and do a secondary down the road. You know, you look at Kite, right, which a lot of people talk about. We did their IPO, and then a year later we did their follow-on, and then a year later we did their follow-on, and then ultimately they sold. It was a huge win for everyone, for investors, for the company, for Jefferies, most importantly for patients, where they're actually making a difference in lymphoma and so on. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, because they also took some strategic money along the process.
Inon, can you talk a little bit about some of the government roles that you've played and how the government has helped to create the ecosystem for technological innovation in Israel?
Thank you. I apologize for my delay. I had to follow the minister. Well, you know, you said something and you corrected yourself. This is something that happens to many Israelis, especially people from the government. We think that we invented everything, and everything that happens in Israel is only thanks to the government, and that's surely not the case. But I think that looking around and you know, trying to put the finger on different measurements, vehicles that the government imposed during the years. So I think I don't know how far you would like to see, but one may say that the Yozma program that was beginning of the 90s was one of the fundamental for the venture capital industry in Israel, and of course the technological incubators program that was supportive for the integration of the many human capital professionals that came from the former Soviet Union. Coming back into these days, I think there's some interesting activities that the government launched. First of all, I had the pleasure to serve till 1 year ago. I was Vice Director General of the Ministry of Economy and Industry, and I was part of the steering committee of the chief scientist. And I always laughed on Avi Hasson, the former chief scientist, because he said that he's anti-targeting. But when you looked on different measurement, different policies that he progressed, you've seen that we gave special treatments to biotechnology, to nanotechnology, cyber, be it, I would say, agro technologies and things like that. And some of them are due to necessities. So when I would say the governmental policy of the State of Israel towards the promotion of the growth of the cybersecurity vertical comes first from the understanding that we need to have this competence in Israel. But we want to also doing that in parallel, we try to support the industry. So it would be for cybersecurity, it would be for digital health, by the way, and it would be for everything which could be related to smart transportation. And again, this comes from the Prime Minister's decision to launch it's called the Initiative for Reduction of Usage of Petrol in Transportation. Now, taking these activities together with we have this, I would say, strategic infrastructure of the chief scientist, which invest around 400 million, sometimes more, annually in the tech industry, and not only. We try to emphasize an effort also on traditional industries. So it was decided and actually launched a reform in the former chief scientist, if you like, and became the Innovation Authority. And in this regard, there was at least intention to try and give them additional possibilities, maybe to do some programs in regarding to depth, which was not allowed before, and I still don't know where they are, but this is it was at least in the vision. Another important program that the government launched like 3-4 years ago is Digital Israel. This very important program, we've been a little bit late, I would say. Many other countries launched those similar programs much before us. But I think the importance of the program in Israel, and I had the pleasure to to progress this or to lead the program in the Ministry of Economy and Industry is that we try to modernize the government services together with creating schemes for cooperation between the private market and the government or government institutions, be it hospitals or municipalities, etc., etc. As then the advantage is that you give the entrepreneurs, you give the companies the ability to play with those who need. And then you create interaction, you create synergies, and you decreasing the risk for the companies because the user is already using that. So one of the new program, relatively new program of the chief scientist is special technologies as solutions for the government or municipalities, doesn't matter how you call it. I think that in this regard, we've also launched at least two important vehicles. One, maybe 3 years ago, it was fund for creation of private equity firms, private equity funds, and these were funds in order to increase the supply with the non-high-tech sector, because it tends to be like there was not enough money over there. And recently, I don't know, it was discussed earlier today, again, I think one of the disadvantages which exist today in the market is that institutional investors in Israel are not really there for the industry, if you like. So this is a new program which was launched by the Ministry of Finance and us, Ministry of Economy and Industry, and I think that if it will be successful, then maybe instead of, and excuse me, all the friends, investors in the room, I remember that I spoke with one of the investment managers of one of the insurance companies, which told me that it's easier for him to invest in a building in India and to, that may lose some because nobody will really hear about it. But if he will invest in an Israeli company and this company will default that way or another, this is going to be a great headache. So I think that for the importance, both for the for the insurers and both because the insurers live in Israel, so it's very logic that they will be part of the party, if I may say, and that it will be mutually beneficial for all parts. So I think in general that covers the major schemes, if you like.
Natti, some comments?
Not on that front.
The role of universities in the United States, a number of universities, leading universities, have established technological offices to try to commercialize and participate in the research that's being done. Adam, I know that that's something that you've been particularly interested in Israel. I know many of the leading universities are trying to start these kind of programs.
It's a fantastic opportunity for innovation and for giving companies a leg up. And Israel's actually done recently a very good job about allowing that technology that's developed in the universities to come out in a very seamless and easy way. Historically, this would have been a much more complicated process, and a lot of great research wasn't grown and was left at the university and wasn't really optimized from a business perspective because it was so difficult to move it out of the university. And I think the country's done an amazing job in allowing this IP to come with the developers outside of academia and turn into profitable businesses. It's a fantastic opportunity. The educational institutions in Israel are spectacular, and there's an enormous amount of research done there. And now you're really seeing with the combination of the seamlessness the universities are allowing that technology and that innovation to come out, and huge progress from the chief scientist's office in terms of making it easier and easier to globalize the companies that it's backing. You're just seeing it's really an instance where a country is really doing more and more every year to create global companies.
And on that note, and it's a bit of a not sequitur, but I think it's an important point, SOSA, right, which I think is an interesting reverse angle. This is one of the most interesting things I've seen in Israel in the last couple of years is that global multinational companies in different sectors are looking for access to the innovation that is taking place in Israel. And you don't really think about it, but it's a challenge. If a big Netherlands energy company like Enel wants access to energy technologies in Israel, what are they going to do? Are they going to send Klaus or whatever the right name is for someone from the Netherlands to fly over and put him in an office in Azrieli Tower and say, go get him? It's a little bit of a challenge. And what SOSA did that I thought was really interesting was it was founded by the founders of a lot of the largest VCs in Israel's personal money. And they bought a building in Tel Aviv, and it's kind of a shared workspace, but that's kind of where the similarities with WeWork end. It's kind of meant to be almost a town square of innovation in Tel Aviv, and now in New York, and I think hopefully soon in London. And it's shared by a lot of the VCs are helping these companies. But what we've seen happen, which is really remarkable, is first it began by these companies sending an individual to those offices to sit there and seek out technologies that work for them. Eventually, what really transpired that was interesting was they started asking SOSA to hire for them a person that fit a particular parameter that would be an employee of theirs sitting at SOSA and seeking out innovations. And so effectively, it's become a landing pad for global multinationals where they have service providers and access to innovation and office space and a collaborative environment and access to the VCs, which makes it an incredibly efficient way of helping these companies connect into global multinationals and scale and grow. And then ideally either go public locally or go public in the US or sell. But that's a pretty interesting change also.
It's a really interesting step by the multinationals, because what you find is early stage companies have a culture, and what you find is large multinationals partnering with those early stage companies and acquiring those early stage companies. Really, when it's successful, when it's the most successful, it's when they really understand the culture.
That's right.
You look at all these instances where you had an incredible early stage company, gets bought by a large multinational, and it just dies. And that's usually a cultural issue. And so you've got large multinationals now taking the initiative to come and integrate themselves into the culture before making these business decisions.
Yep.
And you're really seeing...
They test the waters. Yeah.
Exactly. You're seeing much more success from that. It's a very innovative approach.
I've been to SOSA 3 times in the last year, and once it was the Prime Minister of Australia was there, and the next time the CEO of Munich Re was there, and the next time, and so each time you're seeing that it's really working, and it's a great way of giving these companies in Israel exposure that otherwise, they wouldn't have had. And sometimes they were undiscovered. Some company would discover them and scoop them up real quick, and like you say, you'd never hear another thing about them. Now all of a sudden, it's giving them much more exposure and enabling them to really choose their path more than just kind of take the one opportunity that's there.
I think that SOSA could be a good idea or example, but if you look around, you will see that there is a very popular job in Israel these days, and generally who is doing that, his name is not Klaus. It could be Gabi or Eric or Michal. Yeah. And the scouter is a very, I would say, attractive job these days. And you find out that many multinational companies are coming around. They may have a person, 2, 3, based there. By the way, another model is that if a company, acquired another company, so okay, they have the R&D of 10, 50 people, and then this R&D center starts to do some scouting. And by the way, maybe two remarks. One, we found out, getting back into the academia, we find out that academia, the TTOs in Israel, I think, been launched quite in a very early stage, maybe the same time as in the US, and they've been working quite intensively. And these days they work in a private model, private sector models. A very good friend of mine is leading the Technion TTO office and others. You mentioned the synergies between the multinationals and the Israeli companies, on principle, this should work like that. There are still examples of cases this was not the case.
Sure.
Due to, sometimes the multinational change the direction. Solel was bought by Siemens. Everybody thought that's going to be a great thing. And after a year or 2 years, actually they closed it. And there's some other examples in this regard. Still, for sure, for me, as long as whoever it can be that is connected to the market, connected to the needs, is coming to Israel, is working with the companies, is helping them to get the best idea, the best validations, and of course, if they can help them in finding the way to the markets, so be it with interfaces like SOSA and many others which exist, every umbrella that could support that is for sure helpful and beneficial.
And what I like about it in particular is that now all of a sudden these Israeli technology companies or industrial technology companies don't have to just sell. They can start doing work with one multinational and another multinational and drive revenue and drive growth and not have to necessarily sell themselves too early, give them exposure to a lot more and not get the technology just exported out of Israel, but rather have it grow there while generating revenue from these multinationals. And I like that aspect of that model.
I want to add regarding a university and academic world. There is an international problem that train operators don't like to talk about it. It's called suicide. There are thousands of people kill themselves every year around the world. And we were sitting with our technology, which is supposed to be obstacle detection. And it turned out to be that the academic world have quite a lot of knowledge regarding human behavior, pain, mental health, and so on. So we launched now a project which combines 3 parts. It's us as technology, academic in Israel and Switzerland, as the knowledge about human behavior, and the train operator who hold all the statistic about those people. Train operator, I shamed because of people kill themselves in front of train. They got nothing to be ashamed of, and we are trying now with this research with the academic world to take the subject out and help them to reduce the number. But you can see it was working very easily that the academic world had quite a lot of knowledge about the thing we needed help, and it's working quite good.
And think about that, right? This train weighs how much?
Thousands of tons. Yeah.
Takes 800 meters to stop, right? Traveling 200.
1 mile, 1 mile, yeah.
With that data, the ability to know that there are certain areas of danger, certain areas where the data speaks to the need to slow down or be more aware, that saves lives. And that's remarkable kind of stuff of where kind of technology and research and academia all kind of meet to produce some pretty unique and great results. And that was one of the things we found interesting.
I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions, comments. I will. I'm a professor. I have that right. Yes, sir.
I have a question, and this is maybe more for the minister, but anyone can chime in. Everything seems to be fine and good right now in terms of having the people that are trained at the university level that are then ready to go into the workforce, people that are technically trained. But I've seen and heard about some studies recently that suggested that right now, the number of children that are in first grade in Israel, about 45% come from the Haredi and Arab community, where the education systems are really not up to snuff, especially in the STEM subjects. So what is the government doing? Because this is something that could be a ticking time bomb down the road.
That's true. I'm just coming with lunch together with the minister, with some of the Jewish leaders, and one of the question was that one of the leaders mentioned that he came across the new statistics that in the secular society in Israel, it's bon ton to have 4 kids now. So, and I can tell you that many of my friends or neighbors or whatever, they have 4 kids, and still the statistics is very challenging. Now, it's not a secret that the government invests a lot of energies and funding in order to find solution to include people from different groups that you mentioned into the labor force. Sometimes it's include politics. Should they do something else beside of work? Army, for example. So then you find some part in the Israeli society that don't agree, and it creates noise and tension. So on general, what I can say is that we are aware of that. We invest a lot of energy. I am not sure that I'm validating the beginning of your remark that everything is good. We suffer from lack of engineers. It's just headlines from yesterday's newspapers that there's rumors that Amazon is ready to pay 60,000 shekels for engineers. That would kill the market. It's already creating. It's a disaster. Now, so this is on one hand speaking about the top tier engineers, and on the other hand, there's a lack of I would call it professional jobs in Israel for the traditional industries. So you may find that in order to have somebody who works and make the plastic, I don't know how you call it. Shablonot. Yes. Templates, okay? They get like, I don't know, 20,000 shekels a month for 25,000 shekels a month, which is relatively high for industry because there's no people doing that. There's no enough plumbers or electricians and welders. Because the Jewish mother doesn't really like the people to go and be a plumber or a welder, okay? So this is part of the challenge, okay? So this is an issue, you know. It's the 17th, it's going to be the 17th Independence Day of the State of Israel. And luckily, we have a lot of achievements and things to say and to show. And we also have some challenges. And this is surely going to be one of the major challenges that our different governments will have to face with. Thank you.
And frankly, it's one of the things we think about, in addition to the fee we make by raising these companies in Israel money, we realize what the implications of those dollars are. The hiring and the growing and the Israeli companies acquiring foreign companies, which we're starting to see. Somebody once asked us if, our commitment to Israel is really that robust if we don't have a 20 square feet there. And my thought is that it's much more robust if we execute by raising these companies the money they need to grow and hire, and it helps unemployment, it helps the tax base, it helps all of that, and I think that's the stuff that really is important for the banks to do anyway.
But by the way, we're not just talking, and we're not just trying to promote them on going to the work, to be employees. Under the scheme of the Innovation Authority and some other programs, we give, I would say, quite interesting support for any business which has one founder. If there's one founder from different founders, ultra-Orthodox, or if they're based in an Arab village or something, they get much higher support from the government. And in addition, we try to create atmosphere, because sometimes it's also a perspective of would entrepreneurship be common in this society or another society? Would people go out of home in this society or that society? So it's not an easy and not a fast solution that could be made.
Do we have a final question to end the day? Stephen, do you have a question?
I'm going to just transition to thanks, but Please thank your panel.
Oh, well, thank you, panel.
May I just say one word?
Please, say several words, please.
It will be 20, I think. So just to let you know, as the economic mission in New York and my other colleagues in the US and other countries, we bring almost every month a delegation of Israeli companies. So last week we had 20 digital health companies. The week before we had 10, and these companies were being in Philadelphia, in Hartford, and in Long Island. The week before we had 10 companies in Miami. Before we had 6 cyber companies. So whoever is interested, and if you're working in financial institutions, we love to play with your CISOs and with your different CIOs and whatever. So please feel free to contact me afterwards or whenever, and we'll be very happy to cooperate with you. So excuse me for doing this.
No. Thank you very much, panel.